All right, today we are doing section 5.8, our last section of the semester for notes. We are going to solve quadratic equations using the quadratic formula. So we're going to be solving problems that we have solved already, similar types of problems. This is just another way of solving them. We've already solved them by factoring. We've solved them by using square roots. Today's method is the quadratic formula. Technically, we can also solve these by graphing. We just have not covered that way. And we will not cover that way, at least not this semester. Okay, here it is. A quadratic equation written in standard form, which we would remember is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, can be solved with the quadratic formula. That formula is, here it is, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. When we use the quadratic formula, we are identifying the a, b, and c from our quadratic equation in standard form and plugging them in. So we plug into the b in both places, we plug into the a in both places, and we will also plug into the c. So all of those get replaced with numbers. All right, our first example, 3x squared minus 5x equals 2. My first question, is this in standard form? No, because it is not set equal to 0. We need it set equal to 0. How will I accomplish that? Subtract 2 from both sides. This step should look familiar because we had to do this when we solved by factoring. When I subtract 2 from both sides, can I combine the minus 2 with anything on the left? No, so it just goes on the end. A squared minus b squared, a squared plus b squared plus c equals 0. A squared plus ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Our standard form. Now we're ready to identify a, b, and c. Much like we did when we had to graph quadratics, I would recommend identifying your a, b, and c off to the side. What's a?
3a.
Just 3. What's b?
Negative 5.
A negative 5, and c is negative 2. Okay, now you have the quadratic equation on your notes just above. I'm going to physically write it on the board so it stays up there this whole time. So now all we have to do is plug in our a, b, and c to the appropriate places and simplify. Sounds easy. It gets a little ugly, but we can handle it. X equals, I want negative b.
5.
Good, so I'm going to go ahead and write the negative and my b on this one. In the future, I probably won't do that. We'll just go ahead and switch the sign right away. Plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. When I write a and c, can I just write a and then c? Does this look right? No, this is not pretty. When I'm taking 4ac, what operation am I supposed to be doing? Multiplication. So what can I use to help me remember to multiply those? The dots, but I prefer parentheses. So put your a and your c in parentheses to remember what operation is happening. All of that gets divided by 2a. Again, use parentheses. The 4 underneath the radical and the 2 in the denominator are always there. It's just part of the formula. Now we start simplifying it. Some people already said the opposite of -5 or -5 is just 5. Plus or minus the square root of, what is -5 squared? Positive 25 minus 4 times 3 times -2. Let's be careful. We have 4 times 3, which is 12, and then times -2, that's -24. So I'm subtracting a -24. What does that mean? Adding it instead. So change it to adding 24. All of that gets divided by 2 times 3? 6. All right, we need to keep on simplifying. What can get simplified next? Good. We can simplify 25 plus 24 underneath that radical. Everything else is staying the same. What is 25 plus 24? 49. What simplifies now? The square root of 49 is 7. So we have 5 plus or minus 7 divided by 6. Now, we split it. Because the radical simplified nicely, we can split it up and get 2 nice answers. So we are going to take 5 plus 7 divided by 6 and 5 minus 7 divided by 6. Okay, so what is 5 plus 7? 12. 12 divided by 6 is 2. What is 5 minus 7? -2. -2 divided by 6. Not -3. -1/3. It will simplify, but it doesn't come out to be a whole number. So what that means is that our answers are that x equals 2 and x equals -1/3. All right, on any of these, the first thing I should be doing is getting it into standard form, meaning it needs to be set equal to 0. What do I do? Subtract the 4. So I end up with 3x squared minus x minus 4 equals 0. Then I need to identify my A, my B, and my C. Who can help me out with that? Sadia? Good. 3, -1, and -4, A, B, and C. Now we're referring back to that same formula that we used last time. X equals, we want the opposite of B, or -B. So what was that going to be? What's the opposite of B? 1. Okay, if you want to write out the -1 on your first step, you can. I just was not going to do that this time. Plus or minus the square root of B squared. What am I plugging in for B? -1 squared minus 4, and then I need parentheses for A and parentheses for C. What goes in my parentheses for A? 3, and for C? -4. That whole thing is getting divided by 2 times A. Now, when we move forward in the future on these, if you want to go ahead and multiply those together, I'd be okay with that. I trust that you're probably pretty good at multiplying numbers by 2. I would not try to simplify anything underneath the radical on your first step when you plug in. Just leave all of that alone. Leave that for step 2, which is where we're at right now. 1 plus or minus the square root of, what is -1 squared? 1 minus 4 times 3 times negative 4. Positive or negative? Well, it's negative 48, but I'm subtracting a negative, so I really make it a positive. I end up adding it. And 2 times 3 is, in the denominator, 6. 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 again, all divided by 6. You're going to have to continue on the next line down. What is the square root of 49? 7 divided by 6. And now, what do I do? Break it down. 1 plus 7 divided by 6. Or we could have 1 minus 7 divided by 6. Okay, we're splitting up that plus or minus sign. 1 plus 7 is?
8.
8. 8 divided by 6 simplifies to be?
Negative 6. Oh.
We're just simplifying that fraction. 4 over 3. And then we've got 1 minus 7. That's? Negative 6. Divided by 6 is? Negative 1. So my answers are x equals 4/3. X equals negative 1. Before you try example 3 on your own, let's first rearrange it together and get it in standard form. What do I need to do to get it in standard form? Add the 6x and add the 7 to both sides. So I end up with 2x squared plus 6x plus 7 equals 0. Let's just identify our A, B, and C real quick. What is my A? 2. My B and my C. Okay, so I put A, B, and C up in the top corner. You've got that formula either on the board or you've got it on your notes. So I want you to try plugging it in and seeing what you come up with. All right, we need to plug in A, B, and C into our formula and see what we come up with. X equals, what is the opposite of B? Negative 6 plus or minus the square root of 6 squared minus 4 times 2 times 7, all divided by 2 times, whoop. On the bottom it should be 2a, so 2 times 2 is 4. Are we all okay if I just go ahead and put a 4? Okay. Next, we want to start simplifying underneath that radical. So the negative 6 plus or minus stays. What is 6 squared? 36 minus 4 times 2 times 7. 56. Good. All divided by 4 still. Now something different happens on this problem. What do we end up with underneath that radical? A negative 20. Now in the past, that would have really freaked us out. We would have been like, something went wrong. I did something wrong. This is scary. But since we have talked about complex numbers, this should not scare us anymore. We know how to handle a negative under the radical. So we can keep on simplifying it. How are we going to simplify the square root of negative 20? A factor tree. Okay, we also use what special letter? The I. So we split this up to be negative, the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 20. The square root of negative 1 is equal to I. And then if we use a factor tree to figure out the square root of 20, what do we get? 2 square root 5. Are we all okay with simplifying the square root of negative 20? That's what we spent last Friday doing. We had to do it some more yesterday. So instead of writing the square root of negative 20, I'm going to replace it with 2 root 5i. If you want to put the I in the front, you can. So negative 6 plus or minus 2 root 5I, all divided by 4. Do we have any questions up until that point? Okay, now something else a little bit different is going to happen. We are not going to split it up like this, like we were doing on the last ones. You can leave it all together because these are not going to simplify to be integers. However, we can simplify because all three of these pieces, the b out in front, the number in front of the radical, and the denominator are all divisible by what? 2. So we're going to do that. Those three things have to all be divisible by the same thing. The b out in front, the number in front of the radical, not under it, in front of it, and the denominator. If all of them are divisible by the same number, we can reduce this. So negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. Plus or minus 2 divided by 2 would be 1. So just 1 square root 5I. If you want to leave off that 1, you can. You can just put root 5I. All divided by 4 divided by 2 is 2. So that would be our final answer. X equals negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 5 times I, all divided by 2. Before you start working through this one on your own, let's get it in standard form together so we're at least all at the same starting point. How am I going to get this in standard form?
Subtract the 4x, subtract the 3.
Okay, one way would be to subtract the 4x and subtract the 3. So that leaves us with negative 2x squared minus 4x minus 3 equals 0. Now what do we notice about the signs on A, B, and C? They're all negative. And if you want to keep them all negative, that's totally fine. However, I prefer to be positive. So if you notice that they are all negative and you want to multiply through the whole thing by a negative 1 and change all of the signs, that is allowed. Okay, because if we multiply 0 by negative 1, it's going to stay 0. So if you want to, you do not have to. It should turn out the same either way. But if you don't want to have to keep track of all those negatives and you want to use positive 2x squared plus 4x plus 3 equals 0, you can. Because we multiplied both sides of the equation by the negative 1, it's a valid math move. Okay, we did it to both sides of the equation. It's just that multiplying 0 by something doesn't change it. All right, let's plug in A, B, and C and see what we come up with. X equals, who can tell me what I should write next? Emily.
Negative 4.
Negative 4.
Minus.
Mm-hmm.
Square root of 4. And then 2 squared.
4. Good.
4, yeah.
4 squared.
Yeah, 4 squared.
Mhm.
And then minus 4 times 2
Okay.
times 3
Uh-huh.
over 2 times 2.
Over 2 times 2. Beautiful. Ian, do you got what's next?
No, I just want to know because I haven't been here, so.
What's next, Jacob?
Negative 4 plus or minus square root of 16 minus 24 over 4.
Beautiful. Who's got what's next? Sadia?
X minus 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 over negative 4. Yeah, over 4, sorry.
Okay, so we should have x equals negative 4 plus or minus the square root of negative 8 over 4. Next thing we got to simplify is that radical. So the square root of negative 8 is equal to the square root of negative 1 times the square root of 8. That's from Friday. The square root of negative 1 is equal to I. And the square root of 8 simplifies to be 2 root 2. So I'm going to replace the square root of negative 8 with 2 root 2i. Negative 4 plus or minus 2 root 2i, all divided by 4.
4, okay, sorry, and then you do
And then we're able to simplify it because we notice, or hopefully we notice, that the b out in front, the number in front of the radical, and the number in the denominator are all divisible by 2. So negative 4 divided by 2 is negative 2. Plus or minus 2 divided by 2 is 1. So I'm not going to write the invisible 1, but you can if you want to. And then 4 divided by 2 in the denominator is 2. So x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 2 times I, all divided by 2. So remember, those are technically two answers, right? The plus and the minus take care of the fact that there are two answers there.